Warning, this episode may lead to rabbit holes, clue chasing, and scriptural loop-de-loops of the very best kind. Hey there, friend, and welcome. I'm so glad you're here, like really a lot. We're in the digging for hidden treasure portion of the 119 Bible Bootcamp now. And this is the part of the journey where we really slow down, where we learn to stay with Scripture long enough for it to really start to open up to us. Today, we're talking about verse mapping. And this episode will be the what and the why part of the conversation. But if you'd like to see a step-by-step how to do verse mapping, make sure to join me for a separate walkthrough video. But right now, I want to explain what verse mapping actually is and then why it might already feel familiar to you. But as always, there's no pressure here. There's no behind, no expectation that you'll do this perfectly or even do it the same way every time. If you're like me, you're already doing some version of verse mapping. When I first started hearing about it and then I saw what it was, I realized that that was how I was already studying scripture. Just now, somebody had given it a name. But sometimes naming things can be really helpful, and verse mapping is actually a pretty good name for it. But basically, if you've ever followed one word in a verse, and then that led you to another verse, and that led you to a footnote, and suddenly you were somewhere else in Scripture thinking, how in the world did I get here? You've already been verse mapping. So before we go any further, I want to pause and say this very simply because it really does matter. Verse mapping is a way of taking one verse of scripture and laying it out on the paper so that you can see what's there. You just write the verse down, you notice the words or the phrases that stand out, you add a few supporting pieces like the definitions or context or cross references and footnotes so that the verse becomes clearer to you. And that's it. It's not a separate special Bible, though there are some great verse mapping Bibles out there. And it's not a special journal, although they've got verse mapping journals and they can be really helpful. It's also not a big, complicated system. It's called verse mapping because on paper, it starts to look like mapping or brainstorming or mind mapping, especially. When you lay the things out visually, you can actually see the connections. One word connects to another, one phrase connects to a bigger idea, one verse connects to the wider story of Scripture. You're not racing to any kind of destination. You're noticing the path that it takes. And if you can write a verse down and ask a few honest questions about it, you can verse map. So here's a simple way to think about it. Verse mapping is really just a way of slowing down with one verse and following the clues that it offers. Words, context, connections, all of that without rushing to find an answer. Or another way to say it would be like this. Verse mapping is one of the ways that we stop reading scripture for something and start reading it with God. So it's not about extracting information as quickly as possible. It's actually about staying present long enough to notice what's there. For me, verse mapping feels a lot like a scavenger hunt or a treasure hunt because you start with one verse or one clue, and then you let yourself follow it just a little, and then you often discover connections that you didn't expect. It feels like this path that God has already laid out for us. We're just learning how to notice and follow the clues. Verse mapping gives us a container for that treasure hunt so that we don't start to feel lost, but we also don't shut down our curiosity. In this last part of the boot camp, we're not focused on learning more methods. Now we're focused on learning how to linger, and verse mapping really helps us to do that. It invites us to stay with the verse instead of rushing past it, to return to it, to notice the layers that we might have missed the first time through. And it's one of the ways that scripture moves from something that we read to something that we abide in. Early in the boot camp, we talked about all kinds of tools like word studies and topical studies, or footnotes and cross references, and commentaries and concordances, and all the things. Well, verse mapping is where all of those tools stop feeling like separate skills and they start working together. And you don't need all of them every time, but verse mapping gives you a place to bring in what's helpful when it's helpful without turning the moment into some checklist. So the tools serve the moment, they don't dominate it. So let me also tell you what verse mapping is not. It's not always colorful or artistic. It's not about filling a whole page or a whole journal. It's not about completing every step. And it's definitely not about proving that you studied deep enough. The point isn't the format. The point is following your curiosity through the verse and staying with God there. Verse mapping can be especially helpful if you want to slow down with scripture instead of rushing through it. If you want to notice those connections and questions easily, or if you've ever felt like you were doing it wrong because your reading wandered around. And then, if you want a way that you can dwell in a verse without pressure. As always, there's a free printable companion for this episode, and inside it, you'll find a simple page that walks you through verse mapping in the same calm, unhurried way that we're talking about. Plus, it's a reusable template that you can come back to again and again and again. And you don't need to fill out every section. You don't need to use it perfectly. Just think of it as a place to let your curiosity land on paper when you want a little structure to support staying with a verse. And if you want to try a little bit of verse mapping this week, here's a simple invitation. Just choose one verse, just one. Spend 10 minutes with it. Follow one clue. That is more than enough. And you can find that companion in the resource hub along with the walkthrough video and all of the videos and episodes and all the things whenever you're ready. So I'll link to that down in the show notes. And in the walkthrough video, I'll actually map a verse step by step so that you can see what this looks like in real time. That's my messy notes, my side paths, my rabbit trails, and all the pauses included. And you don't have to watch it all at once. You don't have to replicate it exactly. Just come curious. And I so hope to see you there. So, friend, let's cultivate a devotional life you love, like really love, because it is possible and it's so much easier than you think. Chat soon, friend.